Deep within the misty, windswept shores of North Carolina lies an island haunted by a centuries-old secret. Long before the Pilgrims set foot on Plymouth Rock, and decades before Jamestown became a permanent settlement, a group of 115 English men, women, and children vanished off the face of the earth. They left behind no bodies, no signs of a struggle, and no burning ruins. The only clue to their fate was a single, cryptic word carved into a wooden post: CROATOAN. For over 400 years, historians, archaeologists, and ghost hunters have asked the same terrifying question: what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Was it a brutal massacre, a desperate integration with native tribes, or did something far more sinister claim the souls of these early pioneers? Today, we unwrap the layer of history, blood, and mystery surrounding America's oldest unsolved cold case. To understand the disappearance of 1587, we must first look back at the corporate greed and imperial ambition that birthed the colony. In 1584, Queen Elizabeth I granted Sir Walter Raleigh a royal charter to colonize the New World. Raleigh envisioned a vast empire, a strategic military base to raid Spanish treasure ships, and a gold mine of natural resources. Later that year, an exploratory expedition discovered Roanoke Island. The reports sent back to England were glowing. They described a paradise of fertile soil and friendly, welcoming indigenous people, specifically the Secautan and Croatoan tribes. Encouraged by this, Raleigh sent a military-led expedition in 1585, commanded by Ralph Lane. But paradise quickly turned into a living nightmare. The military men were not farmers. They relied completely on the local natives for food. Tensions escalated rapidly over stolen property and scarce resources. In a fit of paranoia, Ralph Lane ordered the execution of the local Secautan chief, Wingina. Realizing they were surrounded by enemies and starving, the first settlers abandoned the island entirely when Sir Francis Drake happened to pass by, fleeing back to England and leaving a bitter taste of blood and betrayal on the island. Despite the initial disaster, Sir Walter Raleigh refused to give up. In 1587, he launched a second attempt. But this time, the strategy was different. This wasn't a military outpost, it was a civilian colony. Raleigh sent 115 ordinary citizens, including men, women, and children, seeking a new life. They were led by John White, an artist and a friend of Raleigh, who brought his own pregnant daughter, Eleanor Dare. Their intended destination was actually the Chesapeake Bay, a much safer harbor. However, the ship's navigator, a hostile man named Simon Fernandez, was eager to hunt Spanish ships before winter. When they stopped at Roanoke to check on a small detachment of soldiers left behind from the previous voyage, Fernandez forced the colonists off the ship, refusing to take them any further. The colonists stepped onto the shore only to find the previous fort dismantled. Worst of all, they discovered the skeletal remains of the soldiers left behind. They were completely isolated, trapped on an island where the local tribes now deeply hated the white settlers. With no choice left, they began rebuilding the wooden cabins, praying they could survive. Amidst the looming dread, a brief glimmer of hope emerged. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter. They named her Virginia Dare, the very first English child born in the Americas. She became a living symbol of the colony's fragile future. But joy was short-lived. Food supplies were dwindling rapidly, and winter was fast approaching. To make matters worse, a colonist named George Hull was killed by native warriors while gathering crabs alone on the beach. Panic swept through the settlement. The colonists realized they could not survive without immediate emergency supplies from the motherland. They begged their governor, John White, to sail back to England with the returning ships to personally secure food, tools, and reinforcements. White was torn. He did not want to leave his daughter, his son-in-law, and his newborn granddaughter alone in a hostile wilderness. Finally, after securing a promise that the colonists would look after his family, White agreed. He boarded the ship, promising to return within a few months. He had no idea that he would never see his family alive again. John White arrived back in England late in 1587, desperate to assemble a rescue fleet. But history was actively working against him. Just as he was preparing to sail back to Roanoke, the Anglo-Spanish War reached a boiling point. King Philip II of Spain launched a massive, terrifying Spanish armada to invade England. In a panic, Queen Elizabeth I seized every single English vessel, banning any ship from leaving port so they could defend the homeland. White's mission to save his family was completely frozen. Years passed. White begged, pleaded, and tried to hire small, unreliable ships, but his attempts were thwarted by piracy and naval battles. For 3 agonizing years, 115 people were left entirely to their fates on the edge of a savage continent. Did they starve? Did they freeze? Did they fight? In England, John White could only stare across the Atlantic Ocean, haunted by the thought of his granddaughter growing up, or dying, in the dark woods of Roanoke. Finally, in August of 1590, exactly 3 years after he had left, John White returned to Roanoke Island. The date was August 18th, the 3rd birthday of his granddaughter, Virginia Dare. As the rescue boats approached the shore, the crew saw smoke rising from the island, sparking hope that the settlers were still alive. They blew trumpets and sang familiar English songs into the dense woods, but the only response was the eerie whistling of the wind. When White and his men stepped ashore, a chilling reality set in. The settlement was completely deserted. The houses had been carefully dismantled, not burned down. The heavy iron cannons were gone, and the entire area was overgrown with weeds and vines. There was absolutely no sign of a massacre, no bones, no graves, and no bloodstains. Before leaving, White had instructed the colonists that if they were forced to leave due to danger, they should carve a Maltese cross into a prominent tree or post. There was no cross anywhere. Instead, on a heavy wooden post at the entrance of the palisade, someone had carved the word CROATOAN in bold capital letters. On a nearby tree, the letters CRO were etched into the bark. Before John White could investigate further, a massive hurricane struck the coast. His ships lost their anchors, their food supplies were damaged, and the crew threatened mutiny. White was forced to make the heartbreaking decision to abandon the search, returning to England without ever finding out what happened to his family. He died a few years later, heartbroken. So, what is the truth? Over the centuries, several prominent theories have emerged. Theory 1: Integration. The most logical theory is that the colonists ran out of food and willingly moved to nearby Hatteras Island, then known as CROATOAN Island, to live with the friendly native tribe. Decades later, European explorers reported finding Native Americans with gray eyes and European features who spoke a dialect of English. Theory 2: Slaughter. Some believe the colonists tried to move inland and were slaughtered by Chief Powhatan, the father of Pocahontas, who later claimed to Captain John Smith that he had killed the Roanoke settlers to stop them from expanding. Theory 3: Lost at sea. Desperate to escape, the colonists may have built a small boat using remnants of their houses and attempted to sail back to England, only to be swallowed by the treacherous waters of the Atlantic. Recent archaeological digs have uncovered 16th century English pottery, sword hilts, and copper items deep inland, suggesting that the colony didn't just vanish into thin air, they broke apart into smaller groups and assimilated to survive. Yet, without definitive proof, the fate of the 115 souls of Roanoke remains shrouded in shadow. They remain ghosts at the dawn of American history, a haunting reminder of how fragile life was on the edge of the unknown. What do you think happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Did they become part of the land, or did the wilderness consume them entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more mysteries from the depths of history. Until next time, stay curious.